Many people today regard Sir Isaac Newton as the father of modern science, the man who defined gravity and the laws of motion. But to Newton himself, those were just side projects. His true obsession was the prisma of antiquity. He believed that the ancients possessed a lost physics, a divine geometry encoded into the measurements of the tabernacle and the Great Pyramid. While history remembers Newton for his revolutionary discoveries in a lab, what is often omitted is that Newton was, at his core, a theologian. He was a devout Christian, and he actually spent more time investigating the mechanics of the Bible than he did the mechanics of the world. He believed that hidden scientific blueprints were embedded in the ancient manuscripts. The Library of Trinity College, Cambridge, holds a silent witness to this obsession, Newton's personal copy of the King James Bible. Received in 1660, Newton's Bible contains over 500 readers' marks and exhaustive marginal notes in his own hand. These notes aren't just religious reflections. They are investigations into alchemy, astronomy, chronology, ancient architecture, and natural philosophy. History claims Newton discovered gravity after seeing an apple fall from a tree, but his own private annotations suggest a much more ancient source for his inspiration. Newton understood what Einstein would later extrapolate, that all things are made manifest through light. To Newton, this meant that even spiritual realities could be made visible if one knew how to refract the light of the cosmos. When Newton demonstrated his famous light prism experiment in 1665, it wasn't just a physics trick. He was showing that an object of a specific geometric structure could disperse what is invisible, to make it visible. This was also part of his postulation to a skeptical theological community that the temple in Jerusalem, which had been long destroyed in 70 AD, was not a shoebox-shaped structure, as depicted in art, but prismatic, because it was intended to make the invisible to become visible, and the visible to become invisible. Newton argued that a triangular prism can share the exact same three dimensions as a cuboid, length, width, and height, as given in Scripture, while the structural shape is entirely different. He pointed to Matthew 4, which describes the temple as having a pinnacle. While theologians argued that a pinnacle could be any of four corners on a cuboid, Newton knew that geometrically, as even grammatically, a pinnacle implies a convergence point. He even pointed to the Book of Revelation, where a rainbow appears around the throne room, as forensic proof of a prismatic environment. But because these new interpretations challenged the religious status quo, Newton was labeled heretical. So to avoid excommunication, he kept his findings secret. But he never rested. He spent 50 years studying the structure of the temple alone. The Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD down to its foundation, so nobody today really knows what it looked like. But for centuries, historians and archaeologists have looked at its dimensions as given in Scripture, length 60, width 20, and height 30 cubits, and assumed a shoebox structure. But geometrically, having three dimensions, length, width, and height, is not evidence of a cuboid because the same dimensions are also on a pyramidal shape. However, the reason historians lean toward the cuboid is the internal volume. The Holy of Holies is described as a 20 by 20 by 20 cubit space. In a pyramidal structure with a 20 cubit base and 20 cubit height, the internal volume would be significantly restricted by the sloping walls. To fit a 20-cubit cube inside a pyramid, the pyramid itself would have to be much larger than the dimensions listed in Kings. But again, here is the problem. When historians read about a room being 20 by 20 by 20, they still assume a cube. But architecturally, it can still be 20 by 20 by 20 and have a sloping back wall. It's an assumption to say the Holy of Holies was cubic. And do you know why? Because Moses' tabernacle of tents was the first prototype, and it wasn't a cube. It would be impossible to make a tabernacle of canvas with a flat roof. The roof would sag in under its own weight, and water would sag the roof in. The roof, architecturally, had to have a slope. So, the first prototype was absolutely prismal. Historians look at 3 dimensions and draw a cube. This cuboid model has become the standard. It is neat, it is convenient, but having flat fabric top is an absolute architectural nightmare. The tabernacle had to have a sloping roof. This creates a prism, while maintaining the exact same scripturally given dimensions. So, if the original house of God was prismal in a desert to ensure structural integrity and water runoff, why would the permanent stone version abandon that original sacred geometry? And the answer is, it didn't. The Temple of Solomon was not a box, it was the stone tent. Furthermore, in Scripture, we are told that it had a capstone, in Zechariah 4, and we are also told that it had a pinnacle, in Matthew 4. Linguistically and architecturally, there is no capstone on a flat roof. The traditionally proposed cuboid model simply cannot explain a capstone. And capstone suggests a pyramidal structure rather than a prismal one, because a capstone is the miniature version of the entire structure that fits perfectly at the apex, just like the capstone on the Pyramids of Giza. In a cuboid building, every corner is identical, so there is no capstone. But in a pyramidal model, the headstone is the capstone, pyramidion. It is the only stone in the entire building that completes the geometry. When studying theology, Isaac Newton understood this perfectly. The nested cube critics argue that the 20 by 20 by 20 Holy of Holies must be a cube. But such a geometric assumption is not even scripturally consistent. In the pyramidal model, on the other hand, the Holy of Holies becomes nested in the sloping walls of a mountain-like structure whilst still maintaining its 20 by 20 by 20 dimensions. This aligns with the ancient Near Eastern motif of the Mountain of God. You can have a 20-cubit high interior wall and a 20-cubit wide floor, while the exterior walls slope inward to meet at a single point, the pinnacle, pointing directly to the heavens. When Sir Isaac Newton studied the Sacred Cubit, he wasn't just looking for a unit of measure, he was looking for a cosmic constant. Only in a pyramidal model can you apply pi and phi. If we apply the proportions of pi and phi found in the Great Pyramid to the temple's dimensions, the math begins to hum. A pyramidal temple aligns the physical earth with the celestial stars in a way a flat-roofed shoebox never could. It transforms the temple from a mere storage room for the ark into a mathematical transmitter between humanity and divinity. The cuboid model is a product of historical convenience, but the pyramidal model is a product of architectural precision and scriptural accuracy. It's a literal headstone. It fulfills the metaphor of the mountain of the Lord. If the temple was a mirror of the heavenly sanctuary, then its geometry had to align to the cosmos. And this is what Newton spent 50 years investigating. If the temple was a great prism designed to convey divinity into visibility, or vice versa, what was it actually tuning into? Newton's studies into the Sacred Cubit suggested its dimensions were derived from the Earth's circumference and the distance to the stars. Newton discovered that a prismatic temple with a triangular cross-section would mathematically point to the zenith of Jerusalem, the point where Orion passes directly overhead. Newton believed the angle of this apex matched the refractive index required to decompose incoming starlight. Even the mathematical constants of pi and phi are present. These constants are vital in calculating the distance to Orion. The hypothesis is that the temple's builders used these constants to ensure the terrestrial mirror was in perfect mathematical sync with the celestial map, just like how the Giza pyramids are perfectly aligned to the same constellation. If you overlay the 7 major stars in Orion's constellation that form its primary shape, these align perfectly to the shape of the temple and its walls with a near one-to-one fit. And what is fascinating about this observation is that the ancient Hebraic scrolls recorded that the tabernacle builders borrowed their architectural design from astrology. If Newton was right, if the temple was indeed a prism, then the Temple of Jerusalem was a direct replica of the Pyramids of Giza, or the other way around, and not just in geometry, but also in astrological alignment. And if that was the case, then it would mean that the pyramids in Egypt would have shared the same practical purpose as the Temple of Jerusalem, not as a burial site, not as a mere place of worship, but as a cross-dimensional receiver and transmitter tool. Isaac Newton wouldn't have spent 50 years of his life on this if it didn't represent the ultimate link between science and divinity. We've journeyed through the ancient texts and the complex geometry of Newton's private studies. But now, I want to hear from you. Which specific detail did you find the most striking? Do you think Newton was right? Could the Temple of Jerusalem have been designed as a pyramidal structure, just like the Giza pyramids, and aligned to the same celestial blueprint? Don't go too far. In Part 2, we're going to look at the shocking conclusions Newton reached when he turned his gaze from Jerusalem to the sands of Giza. Once he paralleled the purpose of the temple to the pyramids of Egypt, the physics of the ancient world began to look very different. We'll see you in the next chapter, The Giza Connection.